Hello. Once again, we're back in Jonah. We're going to be talking about God's covering today. Let me begin by reading from chapter 4. It says, Jonah was furious. He lost his temper and he yelled at God. God, I knew it. When I was back home, I knew this was going to happen. That's why I ran off to Tarshish. I knew your sheer grace and mercy, that you were not easily angered, rich in love, and ready at the drop of the hat to turn the plans of punishment into a program of forgiveness. I want to start right there for a minute and just say what an awesome statement. In Jonah's reason for disobedience was there was no reason for me to come down here and pronounce judgment on these people because you were going to forgive them if they turned away from it. And what's the use of pronouncing judgment if you don't carry it out? Because what we have here is a heart issue with Jonah, where Jonah had a hatred for the people of Nineveh that caused him to harden his heart. I've often wondered if God's lesson to Jonah was also about his own personal salvation, not just the salvation of Nineveh. But let me go on. So we pick back up and it says in verse 3, so God, if you won't kill them, kill me. I'm better off dead. Now that is a person that truly hates another individual. When you can say, if you won't kill them, kill me. I also think it's a little melodramatic on Jonah's part, and it's not something I think I would say to the God that just had me swallowed by a whale and puked back up. So anyway, Jonah left the city, and I'm going to paraphrase him here so that we can get through this in a short time. Jonah left the city, and the one thing I know about cities full of sin, take Las Vegas for example, they always got a place to stay. They've got hotels, motels, Holiday Inns. Yep, we all know. And what happens in Nineveh stays in Nineveh. So Jonah could have got himself a room at some swanky little hotel above a casino and probably eaten a free buffet, but instead he goes out of the city. He hates the city so much he goes out of the city, climbs up on a hill, and he builds himself this little ramshackle tent. And Jonah did what God told him to do. We read earlier in one of the other ones that when he went to Nineveh, he carried out God's instructions to the letter. Mainly because I think he'd just gotten swallowed by a fish, and he knew what God would do if he didn't. But he carried out that to the letter. And so God honored that by providing him with a covering. We talk about a covering from time to time in the church, and really what we mean is that God is honoring his promises. Sometimes it means that God has provided us with a spiritual father, mother, or leader to help provide the information that we need to carry some of our burdens for us. But we talk about that covering of God coming in and making our life better. Not necessarily easier, but better. And so what God did here is he sends this covering, this leafy broadleaf plant, and they don't say what kind it is, but this leafy broadleaf plant has covered up the top of the area and shaded poor Jonah as he's sitting there sulking. And it says specifically that God did this to try to change Jonah's attitude, because God hoped that Jonah would see the covering that he was providing and change Jonah's attitude. Because let's face it, Jonah didn't like the people of Nineveh to begin with. He had gone as far away from them as he possibly could get. He had gotten in a storm, woken up, thrown overboard, swallowed by a fish, puked up, and I'm certain not right next to Nineveh, which means then he had to walk all the way back to Nineveh because they didn't have cars. And he did so smelling like absolute whale or large fish puke. I'm betting now that he's sitting under his little tent on the hillside in the heat, he's not a happy camper. So God is trying to turn his attitude and turn his heart. What I want to talk to you about today is that you can experience the covering of God with the wrong heart. But that's not the intention of God. For example, God tells us that we are to tithe. He says, test me in this, and he will prove faithful. You can tithe with the wrong heart, and God will still honor it because you're doing what he commanded. Okay? You can receive covering from an elder at your church or from a spiritual father or from an actual father, and you will receive the benefit of that individual, because God is honoring that individual, just like He did when He said, "But for my servant David, who had been dead for decades, I will honor this." God remembers His promises, and He remembers His covenants, and He remembers His people. And when we attach ourselves to somebody that has that covering, then we receive the benefits from that covering. For example, you could also link this to, just as the sins of the fathers go on to the second and third and fourth generation, so do the blessings. When you have parents that are godly parents, and they provide for you the right education and the right spiritual well-being, they pray over you, they teach you the things that you need, there comes a point where you reap the benefits from that. Even if it's simply because they are financially responsible, and you're able to attend college or whatever it is, there's a benefit to that, and there's the blessing of God on you because of the covering of someone else. And what God has done here for Jonah is He's provided that covering in order to try to change his attitude. And I think God does that for all of us. When God gives us a covering, whether it be through honoring His word with a tithe, whether it comes from honoring the fact of charitable actions, or spiritual fathers, or just actual fathers, when God honors that covering that is sheltering us and providing us with that, He's doing so in hopes of changing our heart. If your heart is right, you are excited about the covering. You are thankful for the covering. You realize you don't deserve the covering. What we see in Jonah is that the covering made him happy. It made his life worth living. And God gave it to him to change his heart. But let me point this out to you. Immediately thereafter, a worm comes up. It burrows into this leafy tree, and the tree dies. When the tree dies, Jonah immediately wants to die too, because his happiness is tied to the benefits he's receiving from that covering. That covering that he did not necessarily earn or deserve, because his heart wasn't in the right place. But he found himself wanting to absolutely die because that covering was taken away. So I want to put this out there for you. When God provides you with a covering that you do not deserve, or that your heart is not right to receive, if we do not get into a place with God where that covering and our heart begins to line up, and our heart begins to reach the point that God wants it to be because of that covering, then in order to try to affect change, God can remove that covering. And sometimes we say, well, why am I going through this? Maybe there was a covering there that was protecting you before. And not only does it tell us that God caused the worm to kill the leafy plant that was providing the covering, then He made it hot, and He made the blistering winds blow. Not only did He take the covering away, but He added additional incentive for Jonah to turn his heart. Okay? When we are going through something, instead of asking, why God? I think the appropriate question for us to ask is, what am I intended to learn? And where do I need to place myself, God, in order to get back under your covering? Alright guys, I went a little long, so I'm going to let you go, and I'll catch you on the next installment. Thank you.